Jack and the Beanstalk. Once upon a time, in a quiet valley, there stood a small village surrounded by green fields and rolling hills. At the very edge of the village was an old, run-down cottage. Its roof leaked when it rained, its windows rattled in the wind, and its little wooden door was always in need of repair. Inside the cottage lived a poor widow and her only son, Jack. Jack and his mother owned very little. Their clothes were patched, their shoes were worn, and some nights there was hardly enough food on the table. But they did have one precious possession, a beautiful caramel-colored cow. Every morning, Jack woke before sunrise and went outside to milk her. He poured the fresh milk into a jug, carried it into the village, and sold it to a local cheesemaker. The milk earned only a few pennies, but those pennies were enough to buy potatoes and bread for Jack and his mother. It was not an easy life, but they were grateful for what they had. Then, one year, a terrible winter came to the valley. Wild winds howled between the cottages. Snow covered the roads and piled against the doors. The cold lasted for weeks, and the villagers wondered whether spring would ever return. At last, the snow melted. But the winter had been so harsh that no fresh grass grew in the fields. Without grass to eat, Jack's cow became thinner and weaker. Soon, she could no longer produce any milk. One morning, Jack returned to the cottage carrying an empty jug. "Mother," he said sadly, "I couldn't get a single drop of milk from our poor cow." His mother closed her eyes and sighed. "I was afraid this day would come," she said. "We have no money left, Jack, and we cannot afford to feed her." "What are we going to do?" Jack asked. His mother looked towards the window, where the cow stood quietly outside. "You must take her to the market," she said at last. "Sell her to the highest bidder." Jack's heart sank. "But she is all we have." "I know," his mother replied gently, "but we have no other choice." So Jack tied a rope around the cow's neck and set off towards the village market. He had not traveled far when he met a friendly-looking butcher on the road. The man wore a blue and white striped apron and a wide straw hat. From his belt hung a small green drawstring pouch. The butcher stopped and admired the cow. "What a fine animal you have there," he said. "I'm taking her to the market," Jack replied. "My mother told me to sell her to the highest bidder." "Then today is your lucky day," said the butcher. "I can offer you something far more valuable than money." Jack looked at him curiously. What could be more valuable than money? The butcher smiled and opened his green pouch. Inside were 3 small beans. Jack stared at them. "Beans? Not ordinary beans," said the butcher. "Magic beans." Jack raised an eyebrow. The butcher leaned closer. "These beans could change your life. They could make you and your mother richer than you have ever imagined." Jack hesitated. His mother had told him to sell the cow to the highest bidder. But what if the beans really were magic? What if they could save them from poverty forever? "Are they truly valuable?" Jack asked. "More valuable than anything you will find at the market," the butcher promised. After a moment of thought, Jack handed him the cow. In return, the butcher gave Jack the little green pouch. Jack hurried home, excited to tell his mother what he had done. But when he showed her the 3 beans, her face went pale. "You traded our cow for this?" she cried. "3 beans?" They're magic beans, Jack said quickly. The butcher promised they would change our lives. Jack, how could you be so foolish? His mother shouted. We needed money for food, and you returned with nothing but beans. As Jack heard himself explaining the bargain, the excitement disappeared. For the first time, he realized how ridiculous it sounded. 3 tiny beans in exchange for their only cow. Tears filled his eyes. I'm sorry, Mother, he whispered. I thought I was helping. Go to your room, she said. You must think about what you have done. Jack slowly climbed the stairs and closed his bedroom door behind him. He emptied the beans into his hand and stared at them angrily. How could I have been so stupid? He muttered. They don't look magical at all. In frustration, he threw the beans out of the window. Then he lay down on his bed and cried himself to sleep. The following morning, Jack woke to find his room strangely dark. The sun should have been shining through the window, but something enormous was blocking the light. Jack climbed out of bed and pulled back the curtain. He could hardly believe his eyes. A gigantic beanstalk had grown beside the cottage during the night. Its thick green stem reached far above the roof, and its twisting vines disappeared into the clouds. The beans really were magic, Jack gasped. Perhaps the butcher had told the truth after all. Without stopping to think, Jack opened the window and climbed onto the beanstalk. Its strong vines curled around the stem like the steps of a ladder. Jack climbed higher and higher. Soon, the cottage looked no larger than a toy. Then, the village disappeared beneath the clouds. Jack kept climbing until the ground could no longer be seen. Suddenly, he heard a tiny voice. Jack, is that you? A beautiful fairy appeared in front of him, hovering in the air on delicate wings. I have been waiting many years for you, she said. You know my name? Jack asked. Yes, replied the fairy, and I know the truth about your father. My father died because he was ill, said Jack. The fairy shook her head. Your mother told you that to protect you. Your father was once a wealthy man, known throughout many kingdoms. He owned a magical golden hen that laid 1 golden egg every day. A golden hen? Jack repeated. Yes, but a cruel giant killed your father and stole the hen. He lives in a castle above the clouds. The fairy pointed into the distance. Jack could just make out the towers of an enormous castle. The golden hen belongs to you and your mother, said the fairy. You must find the courage to take back what is yours. Before Jack could ask another question, she vanished in a sparkle of light. Jack stood silently for a moment. He was frightened, but he was also determined. He crossed the land above the clouds and made his way towards the castle. As he drew closer, the building seemed to grow larger and larger. The front steps were taller than Jack, and the great wooden door looked as large as a house. 2 stone lions stood on either side of it, staring down at him. Jack took a deep breath, lay flat on the ground, and squeezed through the narrow gap beneath the door. Everything inside the castle was enormous. A single chair was taller than a tree. Giant doors lined the hallway, and a great rug stretched across the stone floor like a road. Then the ground began to shake. Thud, thud, thud. Someone was coming. Jack quickly hid behind the leg of a table. A huge door swung open, and an enormous giant marched into the hallway. In one hand, he carried a beautiful golden hen. Jack immediately knew that it was the hen the fairy had told him about. The giant entered the kitchen, and Jack quietly followed. "Where is my dinner?" the giant roared. "It's nearly ready, dear," replied the giant's wife. The giant sat at the table and placed the golden hen beside him. His wife brought over a huge bowl of steaming stew. "I wish you wouldn't put that hen on the dinner table," she said. "That hen is worth more than this entire castle," the giant shouted. "She is about to lay her golden egg." Suddenly, he stopped speaking. He lifted his nose and sniffed the air. "Fee, fi, fo, fum. I smell the blood of an Englishman." Jack pressed himself against the table leg and held his breath. "You're imagining things," said the giant's wife. "There is no one here." "I can smell him," the giant growled. "Eat your dinner before it gets cold," she replied calmly. The giant looked around suspiciously, then began eating. He swallowed spoonful after spoonful of stew until the enormous bowl was empty. A few moments later, his eyes began to close. His head dropped onto the table. Soon, the kitchen filled with the sound of his thunderous snoring. Jack knew this was his chance. He climbed up the table leg and pulled himself onto the tabletop. Slowly and silently, he crept towards the golden hen. The giant snored beside him. Jack reached the hen, gently lifted her, and tucked her beneath his arm. Then he began moving towards an open window at the end of the table. He was only a few steps away when the giant's wife turned around. For a moment, she stared at Jack in shock. Then she screamed, "A boy! There is a boy on the table!" The giant's eyes flew open. "Where?" he roared. "There!" cried his wife, "and he has your golden hen!" Jack ran. The giant reached out with his enormous hand, but Jack leapt through the open window just before the giant could grab him. With the golden hen held tightly under one arm, Jack raced towards the beanstalk. Behind him, the giant thundered across the clouds. "Come back here!" he roared. Jack reached the beanstalk and began climbing down as quickly as he could. The giant followed close behind. Down and down Jack climbed. At last, the cottage came into view. "Mother!" Jack shouted as he reached the ground. "Bring me the axe!" His mother rushed outside carrying the axe. Jack grabbed it and began chopping the beanstalk. Chop, chop, chop. The thick stem shook. High above, the giant continued climbing down. Jack swung the axe again with all his strength. Crack! The giant beanstalk broke and began to fall. The giant gave one final roar as the enormous stalk crashed to the ground. After that day, neither the giant nor his wife was ever seen again. Jack carried the golden hen into the cottage and told his mother everything that had happened. Just as the fairy had promised, the hen laid one perfect golden egg every day. Before long, Jack and his mother had enough money to repair their cottage and buy a new cow. They never again had to worry about being hungry or cold. Jack had made a foolish decision when he traded the cow for 3 beans. But those beans had led him to the truth about his father and had given him the chance to recover what rightfully belonged to his family. From that day forward, Jack and his mother lived a long, happy, and prosperous life together. And whenever Jack looked at the clouds, he remembered the magical beanstalk that had changed their lives forever.